He left her with an old tractor. 6 years later, her farmstead was earning millions. Catherine Miller was kneeling on the dusty ground, her hands stained with grease, as she tried once again to fix the engine of the tractor that kept failing. The midday sun beat down on her back and sweat ran down her face, mixing with the tears she could no longer hold back. It had only been 3 days since she found the note on the kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore, Catherine. The tractor is there for you to start over. Good luck." Those were the only words David left after 15 years of marriage, taking with him the truck, the bank account, and all the savings they had put together to renovate the house. She looked around the 18-hectare property that was now solely her responsibility. The corn crops were wilting from lack of proper irrigation, the shed needed urgent repairs, and the only piece of equipment left was that rusty 1978 tractor that could barely run for 2 hours straight. "Mama didn't raise a weak daughter," she murmured to herself, wiping her hands on the old rag she carried in her pocket. The mechanic in town had charged $500 just to take a look at the engine, money she simply didn't have. All that was left was the public library, where she had spent the last 2 nights studying basic mechanics manuals trying to understand how that machine worked. The neighbor Billy Ray showed up at the fence dividing their properties, leaning on the wooden post with a smile that didn't hide the malice. "How's it going, Catherine? Still playing farmer?" he said, shaking his head. "You know I can buy this piece of land for a fair price. I'll save you that headache." "It's not for sale, Billy Ray. A woman alone can't run a rural property. This place is going to turn into weeds in 6 months, you'll see." She pretended not to hear and went back to working on the engine. The truth was that Billy Ray was right about one thing. She knew nothing about farming. David had always handled the technical side, while she stuck to household chores and helped with the harvest when needed. When Billy Ray walked away, Catherine let despair take over for a few minutes. She sat on the ground and looked at her battered hands, wondering if it wouldn't be smarter to accept the neighbor's offer and start a new life in the city. The sound of the engine finally catching made her jump with joy. The tractor coughed, groaned, but it worked. It was a small victory, but enough to renew her hopes. Over the following days, she established a strict routine. She woke up before sunrise to water the plants manually with buckets and old watering cans. She spent the mornings trying to fix broken equipment, using tutorials she found on the internet whenever she could get a signal on her old cell phone. The first big disappointment came when she realized she didn't have money to buy seeds for the next planting. The corn already in the ground would yield little, and the property's maintenance costs consumed whatever savings she could manage by selling the hen's eggs at the town market. It was then that she discovered a forgotten corner of the property, near the creek that cut through the land. The soil there was darker, richer, different from the rest of the ground. Her grandfather always said that black soil was a sign of natural fertility. "Maybe I can plant something here," she thought out loud. With the little money she had, she bought tomato, lettuce, and carrot seeds at the farm supply store in town. The salesman, Mr. Jenkins, looked with pity at her small purchase. "First time planting a vegetable garden, Mrs. Catherine?" "Yeah, David always took care of those things." "Look, let me give you a tip. That black soil you described is good stuff, but watch out for watering, especially now in the summer. And if you need anything, feel free to come by." "I'll make it easy for you to pay me back." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us folks who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. The first week of planting was a painful learning experience. Catherine got a sunburned back, her hands became covered in blisters, and several seedlings died from either too much or too little water. She couldn't tell whether a plant was thirsty or drowning. At night, she'd sit on the porch of her simple house and read everything she could find about farming from books borrowed from the library. The dim lantern light strained her eyes, but she kept going, jotting down key tips in an old notebook. After a month, the first seedlings began to sprout. It was a tender green, almost shy, but it filled her heart with hope. She cared for those plants as if they were her children, talking to them during her morning waterings. "You're my only chance," she whispered, as she carefully pulled the weeds. The money was running out fast. The electricity bill arrived with late fees, the town sent a notice about overdue property taxes, and the local grocery store wouldn't let her buy on credit anymore. Catherine urgently needed a source of income. The solution came unexpectedly. Mrs. Higgins, who owned a small bed and breakfast in town, mentioned at the market that she was looking for fresh greens to serve her guests. "I've got a few things planted," Catherine said without much conviction. "Oh, really? What kind of greens?" "Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots. They're still growing, but in a few weeks I can bring samples. Mrs." Higgins wrote down Catherine's phone number and promised to call when she needed them. It was a long shot, but it represented hope. The following weeks tested Catherine's limits in every way. The tractor broke down again, this time with a more serious problem in the transmission system. With no money to hire a mechanic, she spent 3 whole days trying to understand the manual, taking parts apart and putting them back together until she managed a temporary fix. When she finally harvested the first tomatoes, they were small but had an intense sweet flavor that surprised even herself. The lettuce came up green and crisp, and the carrots, though crooked, were tasty. She loaded 2 boxes of produce into the bed of the old pickup truck, borrowed from her kind neighbor, Old Bill, and headed to town with her heart pounding. It was her first real attempt at selling her harvest. Mrs. Higgins tasted the tomatoes, and her eyes lit up. "What in the world is that flavor?" "They taste just like the tomatoes my grandmother used to grow back in the day." "Yes, I don't use any chemicals, just cow manure and homemade compost." "Organic! My guests love organic produce. How much do you want for that box?" Catherine had no idea how to price her products. She made up a low price, afraid of losing the sale, and Mrs. Higgins accepted right away, also asking her to bring double the amount the following week. On her way home, Catherine counted the bills with trembling hands. It was little money, but enough to buy fuel for the tractor and some new seedlings. More importantly, it was proof that her idea could work. Over the following months, she gradually expanded the small garden. With each new harvest, she brought her produce to Mrs. Higgins, who always asked for more. Other people started asking about her greens, and soon she was also selling to 2 small restaurants in town. Growth, however, brought new challenges. Demand was rising faster than her production capacity. She needed more space, more equipment, more technical knowledge. That's when she met Professor Sterling, a retired agronomist who lived in town and frequented the market where she sold her produce. He approached after tasting her tomatoes and asking several technical questions about how she grew her crops. "Mrs. Catherine, may I make a suggestion? You have a product of exceptional quality, but you're producing in a very artisanal way. With a few simple techniques, you could triple your production while keeping the same quality." "I'll accept any help, Professor. Could you teach me?" "Of course. How about we become partners? I'll help with the technical knowledge and you give me a small share of the future profits. Nothing too high, just enough for me to buy some books and materials to continue studying." The partnership with Professor Sterling completely changed the course of the business. He taught her crop rotation techniques, showed her how to make organic fertilization more efficient, and helped her plan staggered planting so she'd have harvests year-round. With the professor's knowledge, Catherine began producing vegetables that impressed even experienced growers in the region. Her tomatoes were bigger and more flavorful, the lettuce grew lusher, and she learned to grow other vegetables like bell peppers, eggplants, and zucchini. The business was growing, but the equipment wasn't keeping up. The old tractor broke down constantly. She didn't have a proper irrigation system, and the produce was transported in a borrowed pickup truck that wasn't always available. One day, at the farmer's market, a businessman from the city approached her stand. He was well-dressed, drove an imported car, and seemed interested in her products. "I'm Robert Harrison. I represent Fresh Country Markets in the region. I tried your tomatoes at Mrs. Higgins's restaurant and I was impressed. Could you supply 2 tons a month?" Catherine almost choked on the water she was drinking. 2 tons, I only produce about 450 pounds. "I understand, but if you can reach that amount, I'll pay 30% above the market price. My customers pay well for quality organic produce." The offer was tempting, but it seemed impossible. Catherine talked it over with Professor Sterling, and they calculated that she'd need to plant at least 7 acres to meet the demand, plus invest in equipment and labor. "Where am I going to get the money for all that?" she lamented. Maybe it's time to look into a bank loan, the professor suggested. The trip to the bank was humiliating. The manager looked at Catherine with disdain, questioned her ability to run a farm on her own, and asked for collateral she didn't have. Without proof of steady income and no assets to offer as security, the loan was denied. Discouraged, she almost gave up on Robert's offer. But that's when Mr. Jenkins, the man at the farm supply store, made a different kind of proposal. "Catherine, I've been following your progress for months. You're determined, and your produce is excellent. How about we make a deal? I'll supply seeds, fertilizer, and some equipment on credit, and you pay me as you sell. But what if I can't pay?" "Listen, I've seen plenty of people give up in their first year. You've been at it for 8 months, and you've only gotten better. I trust you." With Mr. Jenkins's support, Catherine was able to expand her planting to about 5 acres. She hired 2 helpers from town, unemployed young men who agreed to work for a modest wage, plus a share of the sales. The first big order for Robert was a partial success. She managed to deliver only 1.5 tons, but the quality was so good that he raised the price he paid and placed a new order for the following month. With the money from the larger sales, Catherine finally bought a newer used tractor and installed a basic sprinkler irrigation system. Efficiency increased dramatically, and she began to fully meet Robert's orders. In the second year of operation, 3 other distributors came looking for her products. The home phone started ringing constantly with orders, and she had to hire 2 more employees and rent a warehouse in town to store the production. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing on. Prosperity brought unexpected problems. Billy Ray, the neighbor who had always mocked her efforts, started making trouble. He claimed the irrigation system was diverting water from the creek that also ran through his property, and he threatened to sue Catherine. "You're growing too fast, Catherine. This organic business is just a passing fad. When it fails, I'll still buy your land at the price I offered you in the beginning," he said with a wicked smile. Billy Ray's threats created constant tension. Catherine had to hire a lawyer to review the water situation, which ate up a good portion of that month's profits. Fortunately, the review showed she had the legal right to use the water from the creek, but the stress of the situation began to affect her health. She would wake up in the middle of the night with headaches, had trouble sleeping, and sometimes felt a tightness in her chest when she thought about all the commitments she had taken on. Professor Sterling noticed she was exhausted and suggested she hire a manager to handle the bureaucratic side of the business. "You need to focus on production and planning. Let someone else take care of the accounts, contracts, and paperwork." The suggestion made sense, but Catherine had a hard time trusting the management of her business to a stranger. She had built everything herself, knew every detail of the operation, and feared losing control. That was when her niece Jennifer, newly graduated in business administration, offered to help. She had just finished school and was looking for an opportunity to apply her knowledge. "Aunt, let me handle the administrative side for a few months. If it doesn't work out, I'll leave, no problem, but I think I can help organize the costs and sales better." Jennifer brought a level of professional organization that Catherine hadn't imagined was necessary. She created production control spreadsheets, organized the sales contracts, and discovered that some distributors were delaying payments without justification. "Aunt, you were selling below market price to 2 clients, and this one," she pointed to a spreadsheet, "has been owing for 3 months and always makes up a different excuse." With professional management, profits increased 20% in 2 months, even without expanding production. Catherine realized there was a lot to learn about the commercial side of the business. The third year brought an opportunity that would completely change the course of the business. A Japanese businessman who had been living in the United States for decades was looking for organic vegetable suppliers to export to Japan. "Mrs. Catherine, your products have international quality. In Japan, American organic vegetables are highly valued. I can pay prices far higher than what's currently paid here." The offer was tempting, but it required international certification, adjustments to production, and investments in special equipment. It would be necessary to practically double the operation to serve both the domestic market and exports. After many nights of discussion with Professor Sterling and Jennifer, Catherine decided to accept the challenge. They secured a larger loan using the property as collateral and began the adaptation to international standards. The certification process was long and bureaucratic. Inspectors visited the farmstead monthly, analyzed the soil, the water, the planting methods, and even the origin of the organic fertilizers. Every detail had to be documented and approved. For 6 months, Catherine lived under the strain of not knowing whether she would get the certification. Any mistake could invalidate the whole process and compromise the investment already made. She even lost £5 from all the stress. When she finally received the international certificate, Catherine cried tears of joy in front of all the employees. It was the official confirmation that her products had world-class quality. The first container of vegetables exported to Japan left on a December day, 3.5 years after David Miller had left her alone with the broken tractor. Watching those trucks loaded with her produce heading to the port was one of the most emotional moments of her life. The first export payments surprised even Jennifer, who had already gotten used to big numbers. The amount received for one container was greater than the entire revenue from the first year of operation. "Aunt, with this money we can expand to 50 acres and double our production," Jennifer said excitedly. But Catherine was thinking about something different. She had noticed that many small producers in the region faced similar struggles to the ones she had overcome at the start. Maybe it was time to use her success to help others. What if, instead of just expanding our own production, we helped other producers get their organic certification? We could buy from them and resell to our clients. The idea evolved into the creation of a cooperative. Catherine offered technical support, financial backing, and guaranteed purchases to small producers who wanted to join the organic farming movement. Within 6 months, 15 families in the region were working with her. The cooperative grew organically. The member producers shared knowledge, split certification costs, and together they could handle far larger orders than they ever could individually. Billy Ray, who had always criticized Catherine's methods, approached her discreetly, asking if he could join the cooperative. His property was going through financial difficulties, and he had noticed how well the cooperative members were doing. "Catherine, I know I haven't always been a good neighbor, but I'd like to give this organic business a try. Do you think I could manage it?" It was hard to forget years of spiteful comments, but Catherine believed everyone deserved a chance to start over. She accepted Billy Ray into the cooperative, setting clear rules and an adjustment period. By the 4th year, the cooperative was supplying organic produce to supermarkets in 3 states and exporting regularly to Japan, South Korea, and a few European countries. Catherine had become a national reference in sustainable organic farming. Success brought invitations to speak at universities, appear on television programs, and even advise government projects on rural development. She, who had never left the countryside, traveled to New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. to share her experience. During one of those trips at an agribusiness event in New York, she ran into David Miller. He was with an elegant woman, wearing an expensive suit and driving an imported car. When he saw her, his face showed surprise and something that might have been regret. "Catherine, wow, look at you. I heard you're doing well with the farmstead." "Hi, David." She managed to keep her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "This is Victoria, my partner." "Victoria, this is Catherine, my ex-wife." Victoria greeted her politely, but Catherine could tell the woman already knew who she was. There was something calculated about that encounter. "Catherine, do you think we could talk?" David asked, with a smile she knew all too well. They stepped a few feet away, and David launched into a conversation that sounded rehearsed. "Look, I know I wasn't a good husband, but you have to admit that if I hadn't left, you never would have discovered all that strength you had inside you." Catherine looked at him in disbelief. "David, are you trying to say you abandoned me to help me?" "Not exactly, but think about it. You were comfortable with me, just taking care of the house. Now look at the success you've made. I always knew you were special." The manipulation was obvious, but there was something more behind those words. Victoria remained close by, listening to the conversation, and David seemed nervous. "What do you want, David?" "Well, Legally, we're still married. I never officially asked for a divorce. Technically, I still have rights to the property. The bomb had been dropped. Catherine felt the ground move beneath her feet. It was true that they had never officially finalized the divorce. At the time, she was so focused on survival that she didn't worry about legal matters. I don't want to cause problems, Catherine, but Victoria here is a lawyer, and she explained to me that I still have rights. Maybe we can reach a friendly agreement. Victoria approached with a professional smile. Catherine, it's a pleasure to meet you. David told me about your inspiring story. Indeed, the legal situation is delicate, but I'm sure we can reach an agreement that benefits everyone. Catherine realized she had been ambushed. That meeting wasn't casual. They had sought her out, knowing about her financial success. David wasn't remorseful. He was interested in the money. I need to consult my lawyers, she said, trying to maintain her composure. Of course, but let's try to resolve this in a civilized manner. After all, I contributed to the purchase of that land. It's only fair that I have some share in what it has become. During the flight back home, Catherine couldn't sleep. The legal threat was real and could destroy everything she had built. Worse than that, she would have to relive all the pain of abandonment. Professor Sterling and Jennifer were outraged when they learned about the situation. Aunt, that man is an opportunist. He abandoned you when everything was difficult, and now he wants to come back because you won. Catherine, we need to act fast, said Professor Sterling. I'll recommend the best rural law specialist I know. We can't let this slide. The lawyer, Mr. Chambers, analyzed all the documentation and confirmed Catherine's fears. Legally, David did have some rights to the property, since the marriage was never officially dissolved. Mrs. Catherine, the situation is complicated. He can claim up to 50% of everything that was built on the property during the period you were married, even having abandoned the home. And what can I do? We can argue abandonment of the home, lack of contribution to the development of the estate, and try to prove that he had no part in the current success. But it's going to be a long and costly battle. The negotiations started tense. David demanded a 40% share of the company's profits, claiming that his courageous decision to leave Catherine free had been fundamental to her success. Victoria conducted the negotiations with professional coldness, presenting complex legal arguments and threatening with lawsuits that could paralyze the farmstead's operations. For months, the stress of the legal situation affected the entire operation. Employees became insecure about the future. Some suppliers started demanding payment in advance, and international clients expressed concern about the company's stability. Catherine reached the point of considering selling everything and starting over somewhere else. The pressure was psychologically devastating, especially because David used every meeting to try to manipulate her emotionally. Catherine, we built that farmstead together. I know I made mistakes, but I can't be left with nothing. Victoria is pregnant. I need to think about my child's future. The revelation of the pregnancy was another blow. David was rebuilding his life while trying to destroy hers. The coldness of his calculations was striking. Then something unexpected happened. Old Bill, the neighbor who had always lent her the pickup truck in the early days, sought out Catherine with important information. Catherine, do you remember that time David tried to sell the tractor without you knowing? It was right before he left. What do you mean, Old Bill? He came here wanting to sell me the tractor, said you two were in need of money. I thought it was strange because you had never mentioned anything, so I didn't buy it. But he never told me about that. Exactly. And there's more. He tried to sell to other neighbors too. Frank Thompson told me David even offered the property itself, said he had power of attorney to sell. The information was explosive. If David had tried to sell marital assets without his wife's authorization, that constituted attempted fraud and completely invalidated his current claims. Mr. Chambers was excited when he received the neighbors' testimonies. Mrs. Catherine, this changes everything. If we can prove he tried to defraud you before he left, his current claims have no legal basis. We'll subpoena him to testify about those attempted sales. David was visibly nervous when confronted with the evidence. His story changed several times during the deposition, and Victoria began to show irritation with her partner's contradictions. David, "Are you telling me you never tried to sell the tractor?" asked Mr. Chambers. "Well, I might have talked to some neighbors about prices just to get an idea. But according to the witnesses, you offered the tractor for actual sale, even negotiating prices and payment terms." The situation was difficult. Maybe I considered selling a few things. And the property. Did you consider selling that too? David looked at Victoria, who discreetly shook her head. "I don't remember offering the property." "So, you're contradicting the witnesses who swore under oath they heard your offer." The pressure of the interrogation made David make more mistakes, and it became clear that he had indeed tried to sell marital assets without authorization. Mr. Chambers explained that this constituted attempted embezzlement. "David, you have two options," said the attorney. "You accept a settlement that completely excludes you from any claim on the property, or we pursue criminal charges for attempted fraud." Victoria realized the situation had become untenable. During a break, she talked at length with David, and when they returned, the change in his demeanor was evident. "Mr. Chambers, my client agrees to relinquish all claims on the property and the businesses developed by Mrs. Catherine," said Victoria coldly. David looked defeated and embarrassed. He signed all the documents without saying a word, avoiding eye contact with Catherine throughout the entire process. When it was all over, Victoria approached Catherine in the courthouse hallway. "Catherine, can I talk to you for a moment?" "Of course. I want you to know that I didn't know the whole story when I agreed to help David. He told me you had built everything together and that you had unfairly kicked him out. And now I know who he really is. A man who abandons his wife in hard times and comes back to steal the success she achieved on her own is not someone I want to build a family with." Victoria handed Catherine a business card. "If you ever need legal services, feel free to call me. This time it will be to defend you, not against you." David left alone that day. Victoria ended the relationship right then and there, in front of the courthouse, saying she never wanted to see him again. He lost not only the rights to the farmstead, but also his companion and the future he had imagined securing. Free from all legal threats, Catherine was finally able to relax and appreciate everything she had built. The cooperative kept growing, now with 43 associated producers, and the company had become the largest supplier of organic products in the region. During the celebrations of the cooperative's 5th anniversary, she received an offer that made her reflect deeply on the future. "Mrs. Catherine," said Robert Harrison, now her main national distributor, "a multinational American company wants to buy your operation. The offer is $4 million. The amount was impressive, enough to guarantee comfort for the rest of her life and for her entire family. But accepting would mean handing over control of everything she had built." Would they keep the cooperative and the associated producers? Probably not. Multinationals prefer centralized, controlled production. The small producers would be let go. Catherine asked for time to think. That decision would affect not only her life, but the lives of dozens of families who depended on the cooperative for their livelihood. For weeks, she talked with each associated producer, listening to their opinions and concerns. Most preferred that she keep control, even if it meant slower growth. "Mrs. Catherine," said Billy Ray, now one of the most dedicated cooperative members, "you changed our lives. Without the cooperative, I would have lost my property. Please don't accept that offer." Professor Sterling, now 72 years old, also spoke against the sale. "Catherine, you built something bigger than money. You built a community. That's priceless." The final decision came during a cooperative assembly. Catherine presented the buyout offer to all the members and asked for their input. "Everyone, this decision isn't mine alone. If I sell, all of you will be affected. I want you to vote consciously on what you think is best." The vote was unanimous. Everyone wanted her to keep the cooperative independent. The result moved her deeply and confirmed her own intuition. "Then it's decided," she said, with tears in her eyes. "We stay together, growing our own way at our own pace." Robert was surprised by the refusal of the $1 million offer. "Catherine, are you sure? That's a lot of money." "Robert, I'm already rich. Rich in friendships, in purpose, in fulfillment. $4 million won't give me anything I don't already have. Dear listener, If you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The refusal of the offer strengthened the cooperative's bonds even further. The producers felt valued and became even more committed to quality and productivity. New investments were made in sustainable technology and technical training. In the 6th year of operation, the cooperative had become a model studied by universities around the world. Delegations from several countries visited the property to learn about the integrated organic production system that Catherine had developed. The small farmstead that was nearly lost for lack of payment had become an agro-industrial complex that moved over $2.5 million a year, directly employed 230 people, and indirectly benefited more than 1,000 families in the region. Catherine, now 48 years old, had become one of the most respected rural businesswomen in the country. But she never forgot where she had come from. Every day upon waking up, she still looked out the window at that old rusty tractor she kept as decoration in the house garden. "You were my first partner," she would whisper to the old machine. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I almost gave up on myself." The property now had modern facilities, computerized irrigation systems, climate-controlled greenhouses, and a small factory for processing preserves and derived products. But Catherine insisted on maintaining an area where it all began, with the same dark soil where she planted her first tomatoes. During an interview for a national magazine, the journalist asked what had been the most difficult moment of her journey. "It was when David came back, trying to take everything I had built," she answered, without hesitating. It wasn't just the legal threat. It was realizing that a person can be so cruel as to abandon someone in their time of need and only return when there's something to gain. And the most rewarding moment? Every day I have rewarding moments. When I see the children of co-op members studying at a university with the money their families earned from organic farming. When I receive letters from consumers saying our products helped in their recovery from an illness. When I look at this farmstead and remember how it was 6 years ago. The interview made waves nationally and brought even more visibility to the cooperative's work. Partnership proposals arrived daily, but Catherine had learned to choose carefully who she associated with. One of the most special projects was the creation of a training center for women who wanted to enter agriculture. Catherine had noticed that many women went through situations similar to hers and needed technical and emotional support to start over. "We women have a special strength," she would say during the courses. "When we dedicate ourselves to something, we put love, persistence, and care into it that make all the difference. Agriculture needs that feminine sensitivity." The training program graduated more than 300 women in 5 years, many of whom became successful rural entrepreneurs. The network of alumni grew into an informal confederation that exchanged experiences and mutual support. Jennifer, who had started as a temporary administrator, became executive director of the cooperative and a minority partner in the business. She brought technological innovations and digital marketing strategies that significantly expanded the brand's reach. "Aunt Catherine, you created much more than a company," Jennifer said during a family celebration. "You created a movement. Hundreds of families changed their lives because of your courage not to give up." Professor Sterling, even in retirement, continued as a technical consultant and had become something of a grandfather figure to the cooperative. His experience and wisdom were consulted for every important decision. "Catherine, when I met you, I saw a desperate woman trying to fix a broken tractor," he said one afternoon as they walked through the property. "Today I see a leader who transformed an entire region. It's one of the privileges of my life to have been part of this story." The cooperative also invested heavily in environmental sustainability. Catherine's property became carbon neutral, with solar panels, a rainwater harvesting system, and reforestation programs that restored springs that were drying up. The environmental success attracted international attention, and the cooperative received sustainability certifications that opened doors to even more demanding and lucrative markets in Europe and North America. In the 7th year, Catherine received the Rural Businesswoman of the Year award, granted by the National Agriculture Confederation. During her acceptance speech, she moved the audience by telling her story. 7 years ago, I couldn't tell the difference between a tomato plant and a lettuce seedling, she said, drawing laughter from the audience. Today, our cooperative exports to 16 countries and handles amounts of money I couldn't even have imagined back then. But what I learned is that true success isn't measured only in money. It's measured by the number of lives we manage to touch positively, by the sustainability of our practices, and by the certainty that we're leaving the world a little better than we found it. The audience rose in a prolonged standing ovation, and many people came up afterward to ask for advice on how to start similar businesses. During the event, Catherine met other businesswomen who had overcome similar adversities. They formed an informal, mutual support group that met regularly to share experiences and strategies. It's amazing how stories of overcoming hardship sound alike, one of them commented. All of us went through moments when we wanted to give up, but something pushed us forward. For me, it was anger, Catherine admitted. Anger at being underestimated, anger at being abandoned, anger at being told I wouldn't make it. That anger gave me energy in the early years. And then? Then the anger turned into purpose. When you discover that you can make a difference in other people's lives, the fuel changes. It's no longer about proving others wrong, it's about building something bigger than yourself. The 8th year brought a proposal that once again tested the cooperative's values. A large American food company offered a partnership that would multiply their national distribution capacity tenfold. The proposal was tempting, but it required industrial standardization that could compromise the artisanal quality that was the cooperative's hallmark. What's more, the company wanted total exclusivity over production. Catherine, this partnership would turn us into a national powerhouse, Jennifer argued. We could bring organic products to consumers who don't have access to them today. But at what cost? Asked Professor Sterling. If we standardize too much, we'll lose the quality that sets us apart. And if we grant exclusivity, we become dependent on a single company. The debate lasted months and divided opinions within the cooperative. Some producers saw an opportunity for rapid growth. Others feared losing the independence they valued so much. Catherine called a special assembly to decide collectively. She presented all the pros and cons, brought in experts to explain the implications, and made sure every member fully understood the consequences of each option. Folks, this decision is going to define the future of our cooperative for the next few decades, she said. We need to choose between fast growth with high risks or gradual growth while keeping our independence. The vote was close. 52% chose to keep their independence and continue with steady growth. The decision was respected unanimously, even by those who had preferred the partnership. The food company didn't take the rejection well and tried to poach individual producers from the cooperative, offering direct contracts with seemingly advantageous terms. The strategy created internal tension and tested the members' loyalty. It's a classic strategy, Jennifer explained during an emergency meeting. They want to break our unity by offering temporary individual advantages. Catherine decided to handle the situation with total transparency. She called all the producers together and clearly laid out the competing companies' strategy. Folks, you're free to make the choices you think are best for your families, she said. But I want you to understand that these individual offers are an attempt to break our collective strength. If we leave the cooperative one by one, lured by promises, within 2 years, none of us will have the bargaining power we have today, united. That's how big companies destroy cooperatives. Catherine's transparency only strengthened the group's unity. Every producer chose to remain in the cooperative, and the poaching attempt ended up consolidating bonds that were already strong. The food company, frustrated with the failure of its strategy, spread rumors about quality problems in the cooperative's products. It became necessary to hire a communications firm to combat the false information and protect the reputation built over the years. That's the price of success, philosophized Professor Sterling. When you become a benchmark, there are always those interested in bringing you down to take your place. The image crisis was overcome through transparency campaigns that showcased all of the cooperative's production processes. Clients and partners visited the facilities, talked with producers, and were able to see firsthand the quality and sustainability of the methods used. The 9th year was marked by the international expansion of the brand. The cooperative opened commercial offices in Miami and Barcelona, facilitating direct business with American and European importers. The profits from direct exports were significantly higher than sales through intermediaries. Catherine traveled to the United States and Europe to attend international organic product trade fairs. Seeing her brand displayed alongside major global companies was a moment of indescribable pride. 10 years ago, I was trying to fix a broken tractor, she reflected during a fair in Paris. Today I'm here representing an American cooperative that competes in the world market. Life is truly surprising. During these trips, she met organic producers from other countries and realized that many faced challenges similar to the ones she had overcome. This inspired her to create an international exchange program to share knowledge and techniques. The program brought producers from 15 countries to learn about the methods of the American cooperative and sent American technicians to learn innovative practices applied on other continents. The cultural exchange greatly enriched the techniques used by the cooperative. One of the most interesting partnerships was established with organic producers from Chile who had developed special techniques for cultivation in dry climates. Adapting these techniques allowed the cooperative to expand production into areas previously considered unsuitable for agriculture. The 10th year was dedicated to consolidation and long-term strategic planning. The cooperative had achieved operational and financial maturity, generating consistent and sustainable profits for all its members. Catherine, now 52 years old, began to think about succession and the continuity of the project. She wanted to ensure that the cooperative would keep prospering even when she was no longer actively involved in daily management. "Jennifer, I want you to gradually take on more responsibilities," she said to her niece. "My dream is for this cooperative to keep growing for generations, always benefiting more and more families." "Aunt Catherine, you're still young and have many years ahead of you. Why are you thinking about stepping back?" "It's not stepping back, it's evolving. I want to have time to travel, write about my experience, maybe help other people who are just starting out. And I want to see you leading this wonderful project that we built together." The gradual leadership transition process was carefully planned over 2 years. Jennifer progressively took on more responsibilities, while Catherine increasingly devoted herself to mentoring activities and developing new social projects. One of Catherine's most cherished projects was creating a foundation to support rural women entrepreneurs in vulnerable situations. The foundation offered microcredit, technical training, and psychological support for women who needed to restart their lives. "I was lucky to have land to plant on," she would say during the foundation's activities. "Many women don't even have that." Our obligation is to give them the tools to build their own success stories. The foundation has served more than 1,000 women in 5 years, with an impressive success rate of 82% of the businesses it has supported. Many of the beneficiaries became suppliers to the cooperative itself, creating a virtuous cycle of regional development. During the celebration of the cooperative's 12th anniversary, Catherine received a surprise that moved her deeply. Billy Ray, her former critical neighbor, gave a public speech acknowledging her importance to the entire region. "Folks, I need to say something true here," he said, visibly emotional. 12 years ago, when David abandoned Catherine, I bet she wouldn't last 6 months. I even offered to buy her land for a pittance. Today I know I was completely wrong. Catherine didn't just survive. She transformed our entire region. My daughters are going to college with the money I make selling to the cooperative. My property is worth 5 times more than it was before. Catherine, thank you for proving me wrong. Thank you for not treating me badly when I joined the cooperative. You are an example of greatness that all of us should follow. The speech moved the entire assembly, and many people cried openly. Catherine hugged Billy Ray and thanked him for the courage to publicly acknowledge his past mistakes. "Billy Ray, what matters isn't what we thought of each other in the past," she said. "What matters is what we built together. Today you are one of the most dedicated cooperative members, and that's what truly counts." The celebration stretched into the night, with music, dancing, and many shared stories about the transformation the region had experienced. It was a completely different community from the one where Catherine had been left alone years before. At the end of the party, when everyone had gone home, Catherine walked alone through the property, lit by the full moon. She passed the modern sheds, the climate-controlled greenhouses, the small canning factory, and stopped in front of the old, rusty tractor. "Thank you," she whispered to the silent machine. "Thank you for teaching me that when something breaks, we can fix it. And when you fix something broken with your own hands, you discover a strength you never knew you had." Sitting on the steps of her porch, now remodeled and comfortable, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey she had lived. From an abandoned housewife with no knowledge of farming, she had become an internationally respected businesswoman. More important than financial success was the certainty that she had used her achievements to benefit hundreds of other people. The cooperative wasn't just a profitable business. It was a model of sustainable development being replicated in other regions of the country. Her organic products reached the tables of families in 16 countries, bringing quality, flavor, and the guarantee of environmentally responsible practices. Every tomato, every head of lettuce, every carrot carried with it a story of overcoming hardship and dedication. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was a reporter from an international magazine who wanted to do a story about women entrepreneurs who turned adversity into opportunity. "Mrs. Catherine, what would be your main message for women going through difficult times?" "That they should never give up," she answered without hesitation. "No matter how impossible the situation may seem, there is always a way out. Sometimes we don't see it because we're too close to the problem. But if you persevere and ask for help when needed, you'll always find a path. And what was the secret to your success?" It wasn't a secret. It was several factors. First, turning anger into productive energy. Second, don't be afraid to learn new things even if they're difficult. Third, choose good partners and treat the people who trust you well. And fourth, never forget where you came from and use your success to help others. The interview lasted over an hour, and Catherine used the opportunity to promote the work of her foundation and the cooperative. Every chance for visibility was used to promote the values and principles that guided her projects. Days later, she received an unexpected phone call. It was Victoria, David's ex-partner, who had become a lawyer specializing in women's rights. "Catherine, I hope you remember me. I'm Victoria. I represented David years ago." "Of course I remember you, Victoria. How are you?" "Fine, thank you. I'm calling because I'm writing a book about women who overcame legal adversities, and I wanted to include your story. Can I count on your collaboration?" "It would be an honor, but may I ask what happened to David?" "Oh, you haven't heard? He tried to pull the same scam on 2 other women after me. Now he's facing charges for fraud and attempted deception. Last I heard, he was working as a salesman at an auto parts store in rural Nebraska." The news stirred neither satisfaction nor pity in Catherine. David had chosen his path just as she had chosen hers. The important thing was that he could no longer hurt anyone connected to her new life. "Victoria, I'll definitely collaborate on your book. I think it's important for other women to know that it's possible to rebuild your life after situations like the one I lived through." Victoria's book became a bestseller and brought even more visibility to Catherine's story and the work of the cooperative. Speaking invitations came in from all over the country, and she accepted those that allowed her to promote sustainable practices and women's entrepreneurship. During a lecture at UC Davis, an agronomy student asked a question that touched Catherine deeply. "Professor Catherine, don't you feel bitter about having been abandoned exactly when you needed support the most?" "Look, dear, for a long time I felt anger and resentment. But over time I understood that those emotions only hurt me. David made his choices and I made mine. If he hadn't left, maybe I never would have discovered what I'm capable of." "So you're grateful to him?" "Not exactly," Catherine laughed. "I'm grateful to myself for not giving up, to the friends who helped me, and to the opportunities I knew how to seize. David was just a circumstance in my story, not the protagonist." The answer drew warm applause from the audience, and several students came up afterward to ask for advice on how to start rural businesses. "Professor, I come from a farming family, but I always thought women weren't cut out for it," one of them said. "My dear, women are cut out for anything they dedicate themselves to learning. Agriculture requires sensitivity, persistence, attention to detail, planning ability. All of those are traditionally feminine traits. What was missing was opportunity and recognition. The conversation stretched on for hours, and Catherine realized she had found a new calling, inspiring and guiding the next generation of rural women entrepreneurs. She decided to create a mentoring program linked to her foundation. The program connected aspiring entrepreneurs with established businesswomen, creating a network of support and shared knowledge. In 2 years, the network had more than 500 participants spread across the country. One of the mentees who impressed Catherine most was Rebecca, a young widow with 3 children who had lost her husband in an accident and was left with a small indebted property in rural West Texas. "Catherine, your story gave me the courage not to sell the land and try something new," Rebecca said during a video call. "I started planting native fruits of the backlands, and I've already landed my first supply contract." "Rebecca, you're on the right track. The important thing is not to give up at the first obstacles and to always keep seeking technical knowledge. Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Have you ever regretted not getting married again? Don't you feel lonely?" The question made Catherine reflect on a side of her life she rarely discussed in public. "Rebecca, I've had a few relationships over the years, but I discovered that I'm very happy living alone. I have a wonderful circle of friends, projects that fulfill me, and the freedom to make my own choices. Loneliness for me isn't about being physically alone. It's having no purpose, having no one who cares about you, having nothing to believe in, and those are things I have in abundance." The conversation with Rebecca made her realize that her personal journey was just as important as her professional journey in inspiring other women. She began to speak more openly about the importance of female independence and the ability to find happiness without depending on relationships. During the cooperative's 14th anniversary, Catherine officially announced her retirement from day-to-day management, remaining only as honorary president and strategic advisor. Jennifer took over as executive president, and the transition was celebrated with emotion by the entire community. "Everyone, the time has come for me to step back and let the new generation lead this project," Catherine said during her farewell speech. "Jennifer and her team are ready to take our cooperative to even greater heights. I'll still be here, always available whenever you need me, but now as an advisor, not a manager. It's time for me to devote myself fully to social projects and mentoring new women entrepreneurs." The audience was moved, and many people cried during the speech. Catherine had become far more than a business leader. She was a mother figure to that entire community. "Never forget," she said, concluding, "that all of this started with a broken tractor and a desperate woman who refused to give up. If I could do it, any of you can too. All you have to do is not give up and always help others grow along with you." The applause lasted more than 5 minutes, and people from all over the region came forward to thank her personally for everything she had done for their families and the community. Free from daily management responsibilities, Catherine was finally able to write the book she had been planning for a long time. From a broken tractor to millions, A Journey of Overcoming became a publishing phenomenon, selling more than 200,000 copies in its first year. The book royalties were donated in full to the foundation, allowing it to significantly expand its support programs for women entrepreneurs. For every copy sold, a new woman received guidance and support to start her own business. The book's success brought invitations for international speaking engagements, and Catherine traveled to dozens of countries sharing her experience. In each place, she adapted her message to local realities, but she always kept the same core: persistence, continuous learning, and social responsibility. During a lecture at Harvard University, a business professor made an observation that deeply moved her. "Mrs. Miller, your story is remarkable not only for its financial success, but for the way you used that success to transform an entire community. That is rare in the business world." "Professor, I learned that success that benefits only yourself isn't true success. It's just temporary luck. True success is the kind that multiplies, that creates opportunities for other people, that leaves the world a little better." The observation became one of her most quoted phrases in articles and books on social entrepreneurship. Universities around the world began using her story as a case study on women's leadership and sustainable development. At 55, Catherine received an honorary doctorate in sustainable rural development from Cornell University. During the ceremony, she reflected on the irony of receiving a doctorate despite having learned agriculture on her own, studying manuals borrowed from the local public library. "Friends, when I was kneeling on that dusty ground trying to fix a broken tractor, I never imagined that one day I would be here receiving this honor," she said during her acceptance speech. "This teaches me that we should never underestimate our potential for growth and learning. We all have extraordinary abilities that we only discover when circumstances force us to overcome our own limits." The ceremony was broadcast live online, and thousands of women around the world watched and were inspired by her story. Social media was flooded with testimonials from people who had been motivated by her journey. One of the messages that moved her the most came from a woman in rural Mississippi who had been abandoned by her husband with 4 young children. "Mrs. Catherine, I watched your talk at a time when I wanted to give up on everything. Today, 3 years later, I have a small artisanal candy factory that employs 8 people from my community. Thank you for showing me that it was possible to start over." Messages like this arrived daily from women of all ages and walks of life who had found the courage to rebuild their lives, inspired by Catherine's story of overcoming adversity. The foundation grew so much that it had to be restructured as a national organization, with offices in 15 states across the country. The social impact already directly benefited more than 5,000 women and indirectly more than 20,000 people. Meanwhile, the cooperative continued to thrive under Jennifer's leadership, who had implemented new technologies and expanded into Asian markets. Annual revenue had surpassed $5 million, and the organization directly employed more than 400 people. During the cooperative's 15th anniversary celebrations, Catherine was honored with the construction of a training center bearing her name. The center offered free sustainable agriculture courses to young people in the region, ensuring the continuity of knowledge for generations to come. "It's moving to see that what began as a desperate struggle for survival has become an institution that will benefit people for many decades," she said during the opening ceremony. The center quickly became a national benchmark in sustainable agricultural education, receiving students from across the country and from several Latin American countries. The techniques developed by the cooperative were systematized into courses that were replicated in other regions. Catherine established a new routine in this phase of her life. 3 days a week dedicated to the foundation and social projects, 2 days reserved for lectures and mentoring, and 2 days free for personal activities, travel, and rest. One of the most memorable trips was to the rural South, where she visited cooperatives that had been created inspired by the model she had developed. Seeing her methodology adapted to different realities but producing similar results was deeply gratifying. "Catherine, you have no idea the impact your story has had here," said Beverly, president of a women's cooperative in the backlands of South Carolina. "When we watched your first television interview, several of us were thinking about giving up. Today we are 43 families working together. The West Texas Cooperative produced dehydrated fruits and artisanal preserves that were sold throughout the country. The organizational model was almost identical to the one Catherine had developed, adapted to local climatic and cultural conditions." "Beverly, you prove that there is no magic formula," Catherine replied. "What works is dedication, unity, and commitment to quality. Each region has its particularities, but the basic principles are the same." During the visit, she led workshops on cooperative management and organic product development, sharing techniques that could be adapted to the reality of the semi-arid region. The exchange of experiences benefited both cooperatives. At 57, Catherine decided to take an even bolder step, creating a corporate university focused on family farming and cooperatives. The project was ambitious and would require significant investments, but she believed it was necessary to systematize and expand all the accumulated knowledge. "Jennifer, I want our legacy to go beyond the businesses we created," she explained to her niece. "I want it to be systematized knowledge that can be accessed by anyone interested in sustainable agriculture and cooperatives." The university would be virtual, offering free and paid courses with certifications recognized by the Department of Education. The project took 2 years to be approved and structured, but when it was finally launched, it had a national impact. The most sought-after course was Organic Agriculture for Beginners, taught by Catherine herself and Professor Sterling, who at 79 still maintained enthusiasm and up-to-date knowledge. The first cohorts had a waiting list of more than 1,000 people. The impact of the virtual university attracted international attention, and development organizations from several countries requested partnerships to adapt the courses to their local realities. Within 2 years, the content was being used in rural development projects in 15 countries. The university's success brought additional academic recognition, and Catherine was invited to join the advisory board of international organizations dedicated to sustainable development. It was a responsibility she took seriously, understanding that her experience could influence public policies. During a UN meeting on sustainable rural development, she presented a model that allowed the principles that had worked in her region to be replicated on a global scale. The proposal was well received and incorporated into the organization's official guidelines. Delegates, what we learned in rural America is that sustainable development is not just about agricultural techniques, she said during the presentation. It's about creating resilient communities, empowering women, and ensuring that economic growth benefits everyone, not just a few. International participation further expanded her network of contacts and brought exchange opportunities that enriched both her projects and those of the partner organizations. American technicians were sent to projects in Africa and Asia, while international specialists came to learn about the practices developed by the cooperative. One of the most exciting projects was the partnership with an organization that worked with refugee women in camps in Jordan. Catherine developed an adapted program that taught small-space agriculture, allowing these women to grow nutritious food even in adverse conditions. It's incredible how basic principles of agriculture can be adapted to any situation, she reflected after a video conference with the project's beneficiaries. They're managing to produce fresh food in repurposed containers. Human creativity has no limits. The project with refugee women was documented and became a model for other humanitarian organizations, expanding the impact of the techniques developed by the cooperative to contexts completely different from the original one. At 59 years old, Catherine received an offer that made her reflect deeply about the future. A major international publishing house wanted to buy the rights to her story to produce a Hollywood film with a famous actress in the lead role. The amount offered is enough to drastically expand all of your social projects, her literary agent explained, and the film would take your message to millions of people around the world. The offer was financially tempting, but Catherine had concerns about how Hollywood would portray her story. She asked for time to review the script and the production conditions. "I don't care how they represent me physically," she told Jennifer, "but I care very much about the message the film will convey. I don't want them to turn my story into a Hollywood fantasy that discourages real people who are going through difficult times." After months of negotiation, she managed to secure a say in the final script approval and oversight over technical aspects related to agriculture. The film would be an international co-production, with part of the filming done at the cooperative itself. The film's production took 2 years and brought unprecedented international visibility to the work of the cooperative and the foundation. During filming, the lead actress spent weeks at the farmstead learning agricultural techniques and talking with cooperative members to better understand the context of the story. "Catherine, your story is much more powerful than I imagined when I accepted the role," the actress said during filming. "It's a lesson about human resilience that needs to be known worldwide." The film premiered simultaneously in the United States and internationally, received very positive reviews, and raised significant funds that were partially donated to rural development organizations in developing countries. But more important than commercial success was the social impact. Organizations around the world reported an increase in requests for information about sustainable agriculture and cooperativism after the film's release. Catherine's story had inspired a new generation of social entrepreneurs. On the 18th anniversary of the cooperative, Catherine spoke emotionally about everything that had been built since that day she found David's note on the kitchen table. Everyone. 18 years ago, I was a desperate woman who didn't know the difference between fertilizer and pesticide, she said during the celebration. Today, our cooperative is a world benchmark. Our foundation has already benefited more than 10,000 women, and our methods are used in development projects in 23 countries. But the most important thing is that we proved that when people come together around common goals and solid values, there is no limit to what they can achieve. You are living proof that cooperation works better than competition. The audience was moved by the speech, and many people shared personal accounts of how their lives had been transformed by participating in the cooperative. Children of cooperative members who were now doctors, engineers, teachers, all educated with resources generated by organic agriculture. One of the most touching stories was from Mr. Jenkins, the agricultural supply store salesman who had given Catherine her first support. Now retired, he told how watching her grow had been one of the greatest joys of his career. "Catherine, when you walked into my store that first day, I saw a frightened woman buying seeds without really knowing what she was doing," he said with tears in his eyes. "I could have discouraged you as many people did, but something told me to give you a chance. Today I know that was one of the best instincts I've ever had in my life. You not only made it work, you transformed our entire region. I feel proud to have been a small part of that story." Mr. Jenkins's testimony moved the entire audience and reminded everyone of the importance of people willing to support dreams that seem impossible. Catherine hugged him for a long time and publicly thanked him for believing in her when she herself doubted her abilities. During the celebration, she walked again to the old rusty tractor that she kept as a symbol in the garden. Now it was surrounded by well-maintained gardens and a sign that briefly told the story of the cooperative. "Thank you for being hard to fix," she whispered to the old machine. "If you had worked perfectly from the start, I might never have learned that I can solve problems that seem impossible." The conversation with the tractor had become a personal ritual. Whenever she faced difficult decisions or moments of uncertainty, she returned to that place where it all began to remind herself of her ability to overcome. At 60 years old, Catherine made a decision that surprised everyone. She sold her share of the cooperative to the members themselves, turning the organization into a truly democratic collective property. With the money from the sale, she dramatically expanded the foundation and created a sustainable rural development fund. "The time has come for this cooperative to belong completely to you," she announced during a historic assembly. "I made my contribution, but the future must be built by you." The money from this sale will allow our foundation to support the creation of hundreds of other cooperatives across the country. The decision generated intense debate among the members, many of whom felt uneasy about the idea of taking full ownership of the company. But Catherine insisted it was the right time to take that step. "You've already been managing this cooperative for years," she argued. "I just sign papers and give my input. It's time for you to also have legal ownership of everything you've built with your work." The transition process took a year and required changes to the cooperative's legal and administrative structure. When it was finally completed, the organization became the country's first large agricultural cooperative, with ownership fully distributed among the workers. The model drew international attention and was studied by economists specializing in cooperatives. Several universities sent researchers to understand how the transition had been accomplished without loss of efficiency or internal conflicts. The secret was making the transition gradually, with a lot of transparency, and ensuring that everyone understood their new responsibilities, explained Catherine, during a conference on cooperative economics at Stanford University. Free from direct business commitments, she was able to devote herself entirely to social and educational projects. The foundation grew so much that it had to be divided into 3 specialized organizations, one focused on microcredit for women, another on agricultural education, and a third on research and development of sustainable technologies. Each organization had administrative autonomy, but they shared the same philosophy of comprehensive human development that Catherine had developed over the years. The results were impressive. More than 15,000 women had already been directly benefited, and studies showed that every dollar invested generated $4 in regional economic development. At 62, Catherine received the United Nations International Human Development Prize, one of the highest global distinctions for people who dedicate their lives to improving human conditions. The ceremony was held in New York, with world leaders and international figures in attendance. When I received my first award as a rural businesswoman, I thought I had reached the peak of recognition, she said during her acceptance speech. Today, I realize that was only the beginning of a much greater journey. This award is not mine. It belongs to all the courageous women who believed they could rebuild their lives after adversity. It belongs to the cooperative members who turned small properties into thriving businesses. It belongs to the technicians who devoted their knowledge to community development. But above all, this award belongs to all the people who were once underestimated and proved the skeptics wrong. Each of those people carries within themselves the power to transform not only their own lives, but an entire community. The speech was broadcast live to more than 50 countries and became one of the most watched addresses in the history of the award. Excerpts were translated into dozens of languages and used in human development campaigns around the world. International recognition brought even greater opportunities to influence global policy. Catherine was invited to join advisory committees for development banks, multilateral organizations, and even governments interested in replicating her rural development models. One of the most impactful consulting roles was for the government of Rwanda, which wanted to develop agricultural cooperatives for women survivors of the genocide. Catherine spent 3 months in the African country, adapting her methods to the local reality and training government technicians. It's moving to see how universal principles of cooperation and human development work in completely different contexts, she reflected during her African experience. These women have been through far greater trauma than mine, but they have the same determination to rebuild their lives. The Rwanda project was so successful that it became a model for other African countries. Within 5 years, the methodology developed by Catherine was being used in rural development projects in 17 countries across the African continent. At 65, she decided to write a second book, this time focused specifically on community development and women's leadership. Seeds of Transformation: How Women Can Lead Social Change became required reading in social development courses at several universities. The book systematized everything she had learned about community mobilization, participatory management, and female empowerment. Each chapter included real case studies of women who had applied the principles in different contexts and regions. I wanted to show that there is no magic formula, but there are principles that work universally, she explained at the launch. Transparency, participation, focus on quality, social responsibility, and always thinking long-term. The second book was even more successful than the first, being translated into 23 languages and sold in more than 40 countries. The royalties were once again donated to social projects, this time focused on girls' education in developing countries. During a visit to Afghanistan to evaluate women's education projects, Catherine experienced one of the most remarkable moments of her life. She met women who risked their lives to learn to read and write, facing constant threats from extremist groups. "Catherine, your story gives us hope," said Fatima, a clandestine teacher from Kabul. "If you manage to build a business empire starting with a broken tractor, we can manage to educate our daughters even with all the difficulties." The parallel drawn by Fatima made her realize how her story had become a universal symbol of resistance and reconstruction. Women in completely different situations found inspiration in her journey to face their own challenges. Back in the United States, she intensified the Foundation's international exchange programs, creating scholarships for women from developing countries to come study sustainable agriculture and cooperativism techniques in the United States, and sending American female technicians to share knowledge in other countries. The exchange program became one of the most respected in the world in the area of rural development, with scholarship recipients who returned to their countries and created local replicas of the American projects. In 10 years, more than 2,000 women from 60 countries took part in the program. At 68 years old, Catherine was diagnosed with a heart condition that required surgery and prolonged rest. For the first time since the beginning of her business journey, she was forced to drastically reduce her activities. "Doctor, I need to keep working," she told the cardiologist. "I have international commitments, ongoing projects, people depending on me." "Catherine, your heart needs rest. You can keep working, but you need to cut your pace by half and eliminate stress. Otherwise, the risks are very high." The news was a shock, not only to her, but to the entire network of organizations that depended on her leadership. For the first time, she had to face her own mortality and rethink priorities. Jennifer temporarily took over the overall coordination of the foundation, while other directors divided Catherine's international responsibilities. The surgery went smoothly, proving that the organizations had become truly institutional. "Aunt, maybe it's time you really did slow down," suggested Jennifer during a conversation at the hospital. "You've proven everything you needed to prove. Now you can enjoy the fruits of what you've built." "Jennifer, I don't know how to live without working. Ever since David Miller left me, work is what gives me purpose and energy." "Working is fine, but not to excess. You can keep being a leader and mentor without working yourself to death." The surgery was successful, and the forced recovery period gave Catherine time for reflections she hadn't had in years. For the first time in decades, she could observe everything she had built with distance and perspective. During the long recovery afternoons, sitting on the porch of her house, she watched the constant movement of the cooperative that now operated perfectly without her presence. Modern tractors came and went through the fields. Employees worked efficiently. Trucks carried products to destinations around the world. "This is what true success means," she thought, "building something that works without you." When she returned to her activities 3 months later, Catherine implemented a much more balanced routine. 2 mornings a week at the foundation, 1 afternoon for one-on-one mentoring, and the rest of the time reserved for family, friends, and personal activities. The change of pace, initially hard to accept, brought a quality of life she hadn't experienced in decades. She returned to reading for pleasure, began painting watercolors, and for the first time in years, traveled just to relax with no professional commitments. During one of these leisure trips to Tuscany, Italy, she met Julian, a retired winemaker who had dedicated his life to producing organic wines. They connected immediately through their shared passion for sustainable agriculture. "Catherine, your story is known even here in Italy," he said during a dinner at a century-old winery. "My granddaughter wrote a university paper on American cooperatives and cited your work extensively." "What an interesting coincidence," she laughed. "I imagine our paths have some points in common." Julian had faced similar challenges decades earlier when he decided to convert his family's winery to organic methods against his family's wishes and the distrust of his neighbors. Now, at 72, he owned one of the most respected organic wineries in the region. The two developed a friendship that deepened through regular correspondence after Catherine returned to the United States. Julian visited the cooperative a few months later, impressed by the scale and efficiency of the American operation. "Catherine, you've managed to create something here that we Europeans are still trying to develop," he observed during the visit. "A true integration of productivity, sustainability, and social responsibility." Julian's visit brought opportunities for technical cooperation between the American cooperative and European organic producers. Knowledge exchange agreements benefited both sides, with American techniques being adapted for the European climate, and vice versa. More important than the technical partnerships, Julian brought into Catherine's life a different perspective on aging and personal fulfillment. He had found ways to stay productive and professionally relevant without sacrificing personal quality of life. "Catherine, do you know what my greatest discovery was after turning 70? He asked during a walk through the estate's gardens. "What?" "That I can have much more impact by being wise than by being a workaholic. When you stop trying to control everything and start guiding younger people, your influence multiplies." Julian's observation made her rethink once again her role in the organizations she had created. She began to position herself more and more as a strategic advisor and less as an executive, delegating operational decisions to younger leaders. At 70, Catherine organized a grand celebration for the cooperative's 25th anniversary, bringing together current members, former employees, international partners, and beneficiaries of her social projects. It was a 3-day celebration that honored not just a company, but an entire philosophy of community development. "Folks, when I look at you, I see the true meaning of my life," she said during her keynote speech. "Every member who thrives, every employee's child who goes to college, every woman who starts her life over through our programs is proof that believing in human potential is worth it." 25 years ago, I was a lost woman who didn't even know how to change the oil in a tractor. Today, our methods are used in more than 50 countries. Our cooperative is a worldwide model, and our foundation has already transformed more than 20,000 lives. But do you know what makes me most proud? It's that you proved it's possible to do business in an ethical, sustainable, and socially responsible way. You are living proof that cooperation works better than competition. The celebration brought together more than 2,000 people, including delegations from 15 countries that had implemented adaptations of the methods developed by the cooperative. It was international recognition of the lasting impact of a journey that had begun with a desperate woman trying to fix a tractor. During the festivities, Catherine announced the creation of a permanent research institute dedicated to developing new technologies for sustainable family farming. The institute would be funded by a foundation created with part of her royalties and investment earnings. "I want to make sure innovation continues even when I'm no longer here," she explained. "This institute will research technical solutions for challenges we can't even imagine yet, but always with a focus on family farming and sustainability." The institute began operations 2 years later, in modern facilities built next to the original cooperative. The physical proximity was symbolic. Advanced research directly connected to practical application, theory integrated with reality. At 72 years old, Catherine received news that moved her deeply. The UN had chosen her cooperative development model as the basis for a new global program to combat rural poverty, which would be implemented in 80 countries over 10 years. "Mrs. Miller, your work has inspired an entire generation of development experts," said the UN representative during the program's presentation meeting. "Now we want to use your methodology to benefit millions of people around the world." The global program represented the culmination of decades of work and the definitive proof that the principles developed on a small farmstead in the American heartland had universal application. Catherine agreed to coordinate the project's pilot phase, working with technical teams from several countries. Overseeing the global implementation of her ideas was deeply rewarding but also challenging. Each country had particularities that required creative adaptations of the original methods, maintaining the fundamental principles while adjusting the practices to local realities. "The most interesting thing is seeing how the same basic ideas generate different solutions in each place," she mused during a video conference with regional coordinators. "Transparency, participation, focus on quality, social responsibility. These principles work in any culture, but the ways of applying them vary enormously." The success of the global program brought additional recognition, but also growing responsibilities. Catherine realized she needed to train a new generation of leaders capable of continuing the work on a world scale. She created an intensive leadership training program, selecting young professionals from different countries for a 2-year course on sustainable cooperative development. The graduates became multipliers of the methods in their home regions. "My mission now is to ensure these ideas survive and evolve even when I'm no longer here," she told Julian during one of her annual visits to the United States. "I'm building a network of people capable of constantly adapting and improving the methods." Julian, now 80 years old but still vigorous, had become a close confidant and informal advisor. His experience with succession at the family winery helped Catherine think strategically about institutional continuity. "Catherine, the best legacy you can leave isn't perfect organizations, but people capable of continuing to innovate," he observed. "You've already created that new generation. Now you need to trust them." At 75 years old, Catherine made the final decision to completely retire from executive activities, keeping only honorary advisory roles. The transition was carefully planned over 2 years, with gradual transfer of all responsibilities. The retirement ceremony was held in the same field where she had planted her first organic tomatoes decades earlier. Representatives from governments, international organizations, universities, and hundreds of people who had benefited from her projects gathered to honor her. Friends, today is not a day of farewell, it's a day of gratitude, she said during her final speech. Gratitude for having had the opportunity to prove that an ordinary person can make an extraordinary difference when dedicated to serving others. 35 years ago, I was right here, kneeling on this ground, planting tomatoes without knowing if I could pay the next month's bills. Today, techniques developed here benefit millions of people in dozens of countries. But do you know what my greatest accomplishment is? It's not the awards, nor the money, nor the international recognition. It's having proven that when we work together, with honesty and purpose, we can transform entire communities. Those of you who continue this work have in your hands tools far more powerful than that broken tractor I was trying to fix in 1988. Use these tools to build a more just, more sustainable, more caring world. And never forget, no matter how great the obstacle, there is always a way to overcome it. Sometimes the answer takes a while to appear, but it always appears for those who persist with dignity and determination. The applause lasted for more than 10 minutes, with many people crying openly. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new phase, with leaders prepared to continue and expand the work that had been started. After the ceremony, Catherine walked one last time as active leader to the old rusty tractor that still decorated the garden of her home. She placed her hand on the cold steering wheel and smiled. "Thank you for teaching me not to give up," she whispered. "I think we managed to do something beautiful together." In the late afternoon, sitting on the porch watching the activity of the cooperative that now operated with total autonomy, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey she had lived. From an abandoned and desperate woman, she had become a respected global leader. But more important than any external recognition was the certainty of having used her life for something greater than her own interests. Thousands of families had prospered, entire communities had been transformed, and a model of sustainable development was being replicated worldwide. It was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, she thought, watching the sun set over the green fields that were once dry and abandoned. In that moment of peace, she understood that she had fulfilled her greater purpose. The girl who once dreamed of a quiet life in the countryside had become a force for social transformation. The woman who was left with a broken tractor had built a legacy that would last generations. Julian arrived the next morning for a visit that would last a few weeks. At 82 years old, he still came annually to the United States, and his presence had become one of the most constant joys in Catherine's life. "How do you feel, my dear friend?" he asked while they had coffee on the porch. "Free," she replied, smiling. "For the first time in decades, I feel that I can live just for myself, without carrying the weight of so many responsibilities." "And what do you intend to do with this freedom?" "Travel with you through Europe, meet your grandchildren, maybe write a third book, but this time about what I learned about happiness and personal fulfillment, not about business." The two spent the afternoon walking through the property, now a harmonious mix of modern productive area and contemplative gardens. Catherine showed Julian all the changes implemented in recent years, proud of the autonomy achieved by the new generation of leaders. "You know, Julian, I finally understand what you meant about being wiser than a workaholic," she said, as they watched students from the Research Institute working on experiments. "These people are doing things I could never do. My contribution now is to guide them, not try to control them." The conversation was interrupted by an international phone call. It was Fatima, the Afghan teacher Catherine had met years before during a humanitarian project. Now a refugee in Canada, she had created an organization to educate immigrant girls. "Catherine, I hope you're doing well. I wanted you to know that our organization received a large grant based on the methods we learned from you. We're going to be able to educate 1,000 girls over the next 3 years." "Fatima, what wonderful news. You prove that education and determination overcome any barrier. Catherine, Without your inspiration, I never would have been able to start over in Canada. Your story gave me the courage not to give up on my educational dreams. Calls like this still came in regularly from people who had been inspired by Catherine's story or helped by her projects. Each one reinforced the real scope of the impact her journey had made. That evening, during an intimate dinner with Julian, she reflected on the cycles of life and how each phase had brought different lessons. "Julian, do you know what my greatest discovery was after turning 70? "What, my dear? That true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you leave running without you. When I look at those organizations working perfectly without my involvement, I feel a much deeper satisfaction than any award I've ever received." "And personally, do you feel fulfilled as a person, not just as a professional?" The question made Catherine think about aspects of her life she rarely discussed publicly. "You know, for many years, I thought personal and professional fulfillment were the same thing. I worked 16 hours a day because I believed that gave me complete purpose, but now I realize I was compensating for other absences with overwork. And today? Today I understand that I can be a whole person without having to save the entire world. I can have friends, hobbies, moments of contemplation without feeling guilty for not working." Julian smiled and gently took her hand. "Catherine, you saved the world that was within your reach. Now you can enjoy the peace of someone who has fulfilled her mission." In the following months, Catherine settled into a balanced routine between occasional consulting work and personal pleasures long neglected. She went back to playing piano, a hobby abandoned since her youth, started an ornamental garden at home, and devoted time to relationships that had always been sacrificed for work. One of the most rewarding rediscoveries was friendship with women her age who had followed completely different paths. She reconnected with schoolmates who had become teachers, nurses, artists, homemakers, each with rich life stories and accumulated wisdom. It's funny how all of us, in different ways, ended up facing similar challenges, she observed during a gathering with old classmates. Relationship issues, raising children, professional fulfillment, the search for purpose. The details change, but the fundamental questions are universal. These conversations inspired her to create an informal group of mature women interested in sharing life experiences. The group met monthly, with no formal agenda, just to talk about the challenges and joys of female aging. "Women of our generation went through enormous social transformations," she said during one of the meetings. "We witnessed changes in women's rights, technology, family relationships. We have a valuable historical perspective that should be valued more." The group grew organically, attracting women from different socio-economic backgrounds united by age and the desire to share life wisdom. Some were retired businesswomen, others teachers, farmers, artists, each contributing unique perspectives. One of the most interesting participants was Mrs. Conceição, an 85-year-old rural midwife who had helped deliver more than 3,000 babies over 6 decades of work. Her stories about changes in rural medicine fascinated the entire group. "Mrs. Catherine, you had the courage to start over at 40, said Mrs. Conceição during one of the meetings. "I had to learn modern medicine at 70 when the doctors arrived in our region. It's never too late to learn something new." Mrs. Conceição's testimony made her realize how her own story, although remarkable, was part of a broader pattern of American women who had overcome extraordinary adversities over the decades. Inspired by the group's stories, Catherine decided to organize an oral history project to record these journeys. She hired a team of young journalists to interview elderly women from different regions of the country, documenting their stories of resilience and wisdom. "I want to ensure these stories are not lost," she explained to the team. "Each of these women has valuable lessons that can inspire future generations. This is a cultural heritage that needs to be preserved." The Oral History Project expanded rapidly, collecting testimonies from more than 500 women in 2 years. The accounts were organized into books, documentaries, and a digital platform that allowed public access to these narratives. One of the most interesting discoveries of the project was the repetition of patterns of resilience, regardless of region or social class. Women who faced early widowhood, abandonment, economic hardship, or professional discrimination developed similar strategies for overcoming them. "It seems that we women have an innate capacity to rebuild life from the pieces," observed Catherine during a project presentation. "No matter how many times we are knocked down, we always find ways to get back up and keep moving forward." The documentation work connected her with inspiring women from across the country, many of whom became close friends despite the geographic distance. She developed regular correspondence with dozens of them, exchanging advice on everything from recipes to life philosophies. At 78, Catherine received an unexpected proposal. The federal government wanted to appoint her as Special Ambassador for Sustainable Rural Development, a position that would involve representing the United States in international forums on agriculture and cooperativism. "Mrs. Miller, your experience and international reputation make you the ideal person for this role," explained the secretary during the meeting to present the proposal. "It would be an advisory position without administrative obligations, simply representing American know-how abroad." The proposal tempted her, especially because it would allow her to continue influencing global policies without taking on heavy executive responsibilities. After talking with Julian and her close advisors, she accepted the appointment. "This will be my final official contribution to rural development," she said during the swearing-in ceremony. "An opportunity to use the credibility built over decades to promote sustainable practices on a global scale." The role of Special Ambassador took her to important international conferences where her presence always attracted attention and respect. World leaders knew her story and frequently asked for advice on rural development policies. During a conference on climate change in Paris, she presented a regenerative agriculture model that combined traditional techniques with sustainable technological innovations. The proposal was incorporated into the conference's final recommendations. "It's gratifying to see how ideas developed on a small American farmstead can influence global policies," she commented to Julian during a call after the conference. "Proof that innovation can emerge anywhere, as long as there are people willing to experiment and persist." International travel, although less frequent than in the past, continued to enrich her perspective on the global challenges of agriculture. Each country she visited showed different adaptations of the principles she had developed, validating the universality of certain sustainable practices. During a visit to Vietnam, she visited women's cooperatives that had adapted her organic production techniques for rice cultivation on small farms. The project's success had improved household income and significantly reduced pesticide use in the region. "Mrs. Miller, your methods worked perfectly here, even with completely different crops," said the Vietnamese project coordinator. "We have proven that sustainability and productivity can coexist in any context." Experiences like this reinforced her conviction about the importance of sharing knowledge beyond national borders. Each successful adaptation of her methods benefited not only local communities, but also enriched the set of techniques available globally. At 80 years old, during her birthday celebrations, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey she had lived since that traumatic day when she found David's note on the kitchen table. 40 years have passed since that moment that seemed like the end of my life," she said during an intimate dinner with close friends. "Today I realize that it was actually the beginning of a much richer and more meaningful life than I ever imagined possible. If someone had told me on that day that I would become an international reference in sustainable agriculture, that my methods would be used in dozens of countries, that I would receive awards from the United Nations, I would have thought that person was crazy." Julian, now 87 years old and a bit frailer, but still lucid and affectionate, made an emotional toast. "Catherine, you have proven that age is merely a circumstance, not a limitation. At 80, you are still influencing global policies and inspiring people all over the world. You are an example of how to live with purpose at any stage of life." The celebration brought together people from different generations, original cooperative members who were now grandparents, children of employees who had become successful professionals, young researchers from the Institute, former scholarship recipients who had returned from international projects, and leaders of the organizations that had emerged from her initial work. "Looking at all of you, I see that my greatest success was not the organizations I helped create," she said during her thank you speech. It was having contributed to forming people capable of continuing to innovate and serve their communities. Each of you carries with you a bit of the values we try to cultivate here: honesty, persistence, social responsibility, care for the environment. These values do not depend on age, academic background, or social position. Anyone can adopt them and make a difference wherever they are. The celebration went on late into the night, with music, dancing, and many shared stories. It was a community united by something greater than economic interests, by a life philosophy based on cooperation and sustainability. At the end of the celebration, when everyone had already gone, Catherine sat down once more beside the old, rusty tractor. This time, however, she was not alone. Julian joined her, and the two of them silently contemplated the property lit by the moon. "Julian, do you think we made the right choices in life?" "Catherine, look around. Look at how many lives were transformed by your work. Look at how this region prospered. Look at how your methods are benefiting people on other continents. If that isn't the right choice, I don't know what would be. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if David Miller hadn't abandoned me. Maybe I would have had a calmer life, with children, grandchildren, and perhaps thousands of people wouldn't have had the opportunities they had because of your work. You were a symbolic mother to an entire community, grandmother to hundreds of young people who benefited from your educational projects." Julian's remark made her smile. It was true that she had given up a biological family, but she had built a much broader family based on shared purpose and mutual care. "You're right," she said, taking his hand. "I did have children, they're just the organizations we created. I did have grandchildren, they're just the young people who benefited from our projects. It's a different kind of family, but no less real." In the following months, Catherine began organizing her personal and professional files, wanting to leave everything documented for future academic research. Decades of correspondence, reports, photographs, and documents told the detailed story of her journey and the transformation of an entire region. The organizing work revealed the impressive scope of her impact. Thank you letters from women who had rebuilt their lives, reports on cooperatives created in other countries, academic studies on her methods, newspaper and magazine articles from dozens of countries. "It's amazing how one person can touch so many lives," she remarked to the librarian who was helping her with the archival work. "Each of these documents represents real people who were in some way benefited or inspired." The archive was donated to the National Library, where it became an important source for researchers interested in sustainable rural development and women's entrepreneurship. Students from various universities began using her documents for theses and dissertations. At 82, Catherine faced a new challenge when Julian began showing signs of cognitive decline. The man who had been her intellectual and emotional companion for more than a decade was gradually losing his lucidity. "Julian, do you still recognize me?" she asked during one of her visits to the United States, noticing his confusion. "Of course, my dear Catherine," he replied, with a smile that mixed lucidity and fragility. "You're the woman who turned a broken tractor into an agricultural revolution. How could I forget?" Caring for Julian during his final years brought a new dimension to Catherine's life. For the first time, she experienced the role of intimate caregiver to someone dear to her, a role she had never taken on due to the circumstances of her life. "It's strange," she confided to Jennifer, "caring for someone who was always strong and independent. But it's also rewarding to be able to repay all the affection and support he gave me over the years." The experience of caring for Julian connected her with other women her age who were going through similar situations, caring for partners, family members, or friends in decline. It was yet another universal aspect of the female experience she had discovered late in life. Julian passed away peacefully at his home in Italy at 90 years old, with Catherine by his side. His last lucid moments were dedicated to thanking her for having found such a true friend in the final phase of his life. "Catherine," he whispered, "thank you for showing me that true friendship has no age. You made my final years much richer and more meaningful. The loss of Julian was deeply painful, but it also brought a deeper understanding of the cycles of life and of the importance of valuing genuine relationships. Catherine organized a celebration of his life, bringing together everyone who had been touched by his generosity and wisdom. "Julian taught me that aging can be a creative and productive phase of life," she said during the ceremony. "He proved that we can continue growing, learning and contributing well into old age, as long as we maintain curiosity and openness to new experiences." After the loss of her friend, Catherine deepened her relationships with other people close to her, valuing more than ever the importance of genuine human connections. She began visiting elderly friends regularly, participating more actively in the mature women's group, and dedicating time to the people who had been important in her journey. At 85, during a routine doctor's visit, she received troubling news about her own health. Tests indicated the onset of a degenerative process that could gradually affect her cognitive abilities. "Doctor, how much time do I have before this starts to significantly affect my mental clarity?" she asked with her characteristic directness. "It's impossible to predict precisely, Mrs. Catherine. It could be 2 years, it could be 10. Each case progresses differently. The important thing is to maintain mental activity, physical exercise, and an active social life." The news, though challenging, did not shake her the way it might have decades earlier. She had learned to face adversity with serenity and strategic planning. "Jennifer," she said to her niece, "I need to accelerate some projects I want to finish while I still have full mental capacity, and I need to better organize the succession of the advisory roles I still hold." In the following months, she intensified her work documenting her methods and philosophies, wanting to leave a record of all the knowledge she had accumulated. She recorded hundreds of hours of instructional videos, wrote detailed manuals, and created a complete online course on cooperative development. "I want to make sure nothing important gets lost," she explained to the team helping her with the documentation. "If my memory starts to fail, at least these records will be available for anyone who needs them." The documentation work became a race against time, but also a rewarding exercise in synthesizing decades of experience. Every concept explained, every technique documented, represented knowledge that could continue to benefit people even after her death. One of her final initiatives was the creation of a virtual mentoring program, where young rural entrepreneurs from anywhere in the world could access guidance based on her experience. The program used artificial intelligence to simulate her responses to common situations, drawing on decades of consulting and mentoring work. "It's my way of continuing to help people, even when I can no longer do it directly," she explained at the program's launch. "Technology can multiply the reach of human wisdom in ways our generation never even dreamed of when we started working." At 87, Catherine organized what she called "my last big celebration." It was a celebration of life that brought together representatives from all the organizations and projects she had worked on over the decades. "Everyone, I don't know how much time I have left with full clarity of mind," she said simply during her opening speech. "So I want to take this opportunity to personally thank each and every one of you for the honor of having been part of this extraordinary journey. When I started, alone in that field, trying to get a tractor to work, I had no idea we were planting the seeds of a transformation that would cross borders and generations. You all have proven that simple ideas, applied with persistence and integrity, can truly change the world." The celebration lasted 3 days and was at once a celebration and a farewell. Catherine spoke individually with hundreds of people, listening to their stories, offering final words of advice, and expressing gratitude for the privilege of having shared their journeys. "Mrs. Catherine," said Billy Ray, now 85 years old and walking with a cane, "you changed my life in ways I couldn't even imagine when I criticized you so much in the beginning." "Billy Ray, you changed your own life. I only offered opportunities. You're the one who decided to seize them. That courage to change and grow is your own doing." Conversations like this one repeated themselves hundreds of times over the 3 days of celebration. Each person shared how her work had impacted their lives, and Catherine could see firsthand the full scope of her contribution to the world. At the end of the celebration, alone once again with the old rusty tractor, she had one final conversation with the machine that symbolized where it all began. "Thank you for teaching me that broken things can be fixed, and that sometimes, when we fix something, We discover we're far more capable than we ever imagined, she whispered to the silent metal. You taught me that persistence solves more problems than natural talent, that asking for help is a sign of intelligence, not weakness, and that when we help others grow, we grow right along with them. Thank you for being difficult, for forcing me to learn, for showing me I was stronger than I thought. Without you, none of this would have happened. In the years that followed, Catherine kept her sharp mind and active spirit, but gradually slowed the pace of her public commitments. She spent more time at home, receiving visitors, reading, painting, and gazing out at the farmstead that had become a worldwide symbol of sustainable development. During a quiet spring afternoon at 90 years old, sitting on the porch watching the steady flow of activity at the cooperative, she received a visit from a young journalist who wanted to write the definitive biography of her life. Mrs. Catherine, what would be your final message for people who are going through hard times like the ones you faced more than 40 years ago? My dear, she answered, her voice still steady, life is going to break all of us at some point. The question isn't how to avoid it, because we can't. The question is what we do with the pieces when they scatter all around us. We can stare at the pieces feeling sorry for ourselves, or we can start putting them back together in a new way, maybe even better than the original. I chose to put the pieces back together, and I found I had enough glue not only to rebuild myself, but to help others rebuild themselves too. Adversity isn't a curse, it's a harsh but effective teacher. It teaches us about our own strength, about the importance of community, about the difference between wants and needs. If we're willing to learn from it, we come out wiser and better able to help others. The interview lasted several hours and became one of the most important pieces in the historical archive of her life. The journalist captured not just the facts of her journey, but the wisdom accumulated over decades of overcoming hardship and serving others. Mrs. Catherine, do you have any regrets about the choices you made? Regrets are a luxury we can't afford when we have important work to do. She smiled. I prefer to focus on gratitude for what we managed to build and hope for what others will build on top of these foundations. If I could go back in time and avoid that traumatic moment of abandonment, I wouldn't do it. Because avoiding that moment would mean avoiding everything good that came after. And what came after was too extraordinary to be sacrificed in the name of comfort. The biography, when published 2 years later, became an international bestseller and inspired stage adaptations, documentaries, and even a television series. But for Catherine, the most important thing was that each new version of her story reached different audiences and potentially inspired more people not to give up in the face of adversity. At 92 years old, during a particularly beautiful spring, Catherine woke up one morning feeling more tired than usual. She walked slowly to the porch, sat in her favorite chair, and watched the sun rising over the green fields that had once been dry and abandoned. Jennifer arrived for their daily breakfast and found her aunt smiling serenely, watching the activity at the cooperative. She seemed at peace, as if contemplating a work of art finally complete. "Good morning, Aunt. How did you sleep?" "Very well, my dear. I dreamed of that first day I managed to get the tomatoes to sprout. Do you know that to this day I get emotional when I see a little seed turning into a plant?" "I do, Aunt. You always say it's a miracle renewed every day." "Jennifer, do you think we managed to create something that will last?" "Aunt, you created a legacy that will benefit people for centuries. The methods you developed are being used all over the world. The organizations you created are solid and independent. And above all, you inspired an entire generation to believe they can overcome any adversity." Catherine smiled and took her niece's hand. "Then that's good. If we manage to plant seeds that will keep sprouting, even when we're no longer here to water them, our mission was accomplished." She spent the day receiving visits from dear friends, talking about shared memories, laughing at old stories, expressing gratitude for all the difficult and joyful moments she had lived. At dusk, alone again on the porch, she contemplated one last time the extraordinary transformation she had witnessed and helped build. Where there had once been dry land and despair, now a prosperous, sustainable community thrived, united by solid values. The old rusty tractor was still in its place in the garden, now surrounded by flowers and ornamental plants that symbolized the beauty that can be born even from the most unlikely places. It was a monument to persistence, to the human capacity to transform adversity into opportunity. As the sun set, painting the sky with golden hues that reflected off the well-tended fields, Catherine closed her eyes and whispered one last gratitude to the universe for giving her the opportunity to prove that an ordinary person, when refusing to give up, can accomplish extraordinary things. The following morning, Jennifer found her aunt in eternal peace, sitting in her favorite chair with a serene smile on her face and a small notebook open in her lap. On the last written page, in her still steady handwriting, was her final message. To whoever finds this notebook, remember that every adversity carries within itself the seed of an equivalent or greater opportunity. The secret is to persist with dignity, ask for help when needed, and always use the success you've achieved to lift others. Life is too short to waste on empty competitions or useless grudges. Choose cooperation, choose sustainability, choose generosity, and never ever give up on your dreams, no matter how impossible they seem. A woman who once didn't know how to change tractor oil became a world reference because she refused to accept limitations. If I did it, anyone can do it. You just have to want it, learn, and persist. With love and hope, Catherine Miller. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching us from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Catherine made the right decisions? We'd love to read your opinions. Thank you so much for your company.